Okay. All right. Before we start, are there any questions on anything that I went over that was kind of a download, right? A 10-minute download of just administration stuff. Okay, it's all clear, all good. I never know if I'm just talking to the wind. I don't know. Okay. So let's start in our Rhino space. Okay. So what do we need for rendering? Well, there's a few things to think about. Okay. So one of these things is just the geometry itself, right? We want to make sure that the model that we're drawing is detailed enough for the stage that we're showing it at. Which is, so it's like a roundabout way of saying that this is a level of detail that we have to think about, and what do we want to show in our geometry. Okay, so if it's really early in the design process and I just want to show, um, general materials, general form, kind of this is what I'm thinking. Something like this is more than appropriate. It has a roof, right? It has some walls. It has some attempt at materials. Um, I've even got a little bit of structure in there to kind of say this is what I want, how I want it to stand up, and then some floor. Um, I think we'd also probably want to add some site. So as we're, um, as you're building off of this, um, that's kind of something you can do in the background is start to add some site to this. But I think I'm going to save that for next week, adding site. So for right now, this is fine for like level of detail. As we progress through our design, though, we would start to detail this more and more, right? So probably get a little bit more nuanced with uh, our material placement exactly, making sure that we have what it's going to be figured out. So this is going to start to be concrete, or is it going to start to be wood? Um, then we're going to start to figure out kind of how those things go together, how thick these things are, how those connections work. And then, for instance, I mean, if we take a look at my glass to my structure, that is floating glass right now. There's absolutely no connection. I don't know how it's going to be connected right now, probably some kind of clamp, but I haven't modeled that. So this is kind of a level of detail at the lower end. Okay. And that's fine for this stage. I think that's where we should be. We just want some sort of generic geometry to focus on. And then once we set up our views and our environment and all of this, scene information, then we can save these images, right? We can use our named view to start to save these views so that when we do end up modeling and adding more information, these are already here. All we have to do is go back and click re-render. Um, that's the goal, right? So I kind of urge you, in the beginning stages of any design to start to think about these renders if you know that they're going to be required, right? Even if you don't, they're really helpful for understanding your design, um, the design moves you're making, right? And materiality and how light's working and how we experience the project. Like it can really help you. So I suggest rendering early. Okay. So all right. So geometry. So I have my geometry here in a separate layer. Okay. Notice I have my morning project on another layer. Okay. It's a little simpler. He's like the shed to my house. Um, so what I like to do for my render setup is I like to do this by layer. So I like to organize by layer. And by that I mean, notice I have materials applied to these other layers. Okay, so I think if I go to Arctic work, no, I don't have materials there. I think rendered, I didn't. I think I might have changed the settings. Oh, no, they're there. Okay. All right, so you can see I already have these materials applied to my geometry. I don't think we need to do that today. In fact, I beg you not to do too much material application. I would rather just see blank clay walls like that Arctic view, so something like that, and then some sort of um, appearance of glass. Okay, the glass will be about the only thing that we'll add. The rest of it, I think um, it should be blank so that we can understand how the lighting is working and how your sky and your environment is set up. Okay, so ghosted. Okay, so I do think so you should set up these layers as you're working so that you have them later on uh, ready to be applied some material to. Okay, so if I try to recreate this, you can see this here. I think if you're following along, we should attempt to remake something. Okay, because you're going to need an object. If you have a grasshopper um, a piece, then you should probably choose that. But you'll want to start to try to separate these out with different layers. Okay, so you just create a new layer. Um, okay, make it blah 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 or ba ba ba, and then you'll select the material, and then you'll go in here and you'll leave this as default, or if it's glass, you can adjust the glass, but otherwise you'll leave that alone. Okay, so that's my setup. I'm not going to walk through this right now. I think it takes a lot of time to just set up one of these, and it should be relatively straightforward after all of our grass hopping. But if you want to, you can go forth and bring in your studio project. So if you have a tiny house that you're going to want to set up these renders for, um, that's probably a good idea too. If you or your grasshopper project for our class. Um, but if you know you set it up for your studio project and you're going to add a grasshopper element to it, um, these renders should also be useful to you, I would think, if you are required to do renders for your studio. Um, hopefully, if you're not required to do renders, then I guess they are just for us. But um, ideally, you'd be able to, yeah, kill two birds with one stone. So, anyways, you need some base geometry, and you're going to use your materials layer changes to do so. So let's get started with V-Ray. So we have our geometry. We're going to now understand this what V-Ray is. Okay, so how it's set up and what this interface is and what these buttons mean. So if we look at this, we have a few buttons up top here. If you just click through them, you can kind of take a gander at what they're called, right? So there's the materials bar. If I click this arrow, it'll open up that interface where I can adjust my materials. Okay, I already have a few of mine set. We'll go through how to make this V-Ray glass, okay, and then apply that to the glass. Then we have Rhino lights. You'll probably see a Rhino sun. If you don't, that's okay. We'll turn it on in a second. We have Rhino geometries. I have a couple of infinite planes, which are really just planes, right, to act as my ground. Okay, we'll create one of those. Then we have render elements. This is render elements. This is the global illumination that's working right now, and we'll talk about that. And then textures, quite the most important being the sky. Okay, so we'll also figure that one out. Firstly, so we have our render settings. Okay, for your render engine here, it should be set to CPU or CUDA, but for your GPU, um, either one should work for these small renders. But I would think you'd probably want to use your graphics card once you get to larger renders. Um, interactive, this is telling you what mode your render is in. So if we go up to this teapot, This is actually our render button. So the full teapot is going to do a production render, which means it's going to, if I click on this, it's going to open up this buffer window, and it will run a kind of uh, production level render, meaning this is going to be it's not interactive. As I start to adjust my view, my camera in Rhino space, my V-Ray is just going to stay as is. This is a frozen frame. Versus if I were to select this second teapot, which is render with V-Ray interactive, this is going to instead be a little bit of a rougher um, uh, image, right? It's not going to be as high a quality, but it is going to mimic what my camera is doing and then any updates I'm doing. Okay, but it does require a lot of power for your computer to do this. So one nice thing is they have render region. So if I click this teapot with the little red box and I just select the area that I want to work on. Okay, so I want to check out this window. As I start to update my render, and you know, maybe I'm not moving it, maybe I'm just playing with the materials or trying to get the map of the building correct. So the texture map, right? I want to get that to look right. I can just focus on this one spot, and then I save my computer energy, less likely to crash, and also it saves my patience because the other way might be a little bit slower. Okay, if I don't want to see this anymore, I can just click that teapot off, and it will go ahead and render me the full image again. Okay. Then it's from this window that you would be saving your images. Okay, so as you're clicking render and as you're working and you find something you want to save, you would click on the save button, and it will open your little dialog box, and then you can type in whatever you want and save your file as a PNG or as a JPEG. As a PNG, it will not save the sky background, whereas a JPEG, it will include that, right? The PNG will be transparent versus the JPEG. Okay, so if I want to stop this, I can just click on stop here, or I can click on that teapot with the pointer again, and that will also stop it um, if I don't want it running anymore. Okay, so that's how to run a render. Now let's talk about kind of setting up the render. Okay, so there's a few things that we have to know to set up in V-Ray. In an Enscape, that's somewhat true too. You need to know where your sun is, and there's kind of already a sky in Enscape, which is nice. But for V-Ray, you have to set up both the sky and the sun because that's the V-Ray superpower. That's how it works so well. It's using the refracted light from the sun and the sky to give a kind of a global effect, which brings me to global illumination, which it can be our first button that we can turn on. Okay, so if it's not on, and if you don't see this box, you're going to want to click this arrow, okay, and open this up. And you can see, if I turn on my, okay, you can see what, without global illumination turned on, what that does. So it's not using those two elements together to refract that light. It's just kind of this really hard direct light. So we want to make sure the global illumination is on and that we're getting all of the light we can from all of the sources in our image. Okay, so global illumination, and that's probably it for this this checkbox area. So I can close that once I have it on. Then the other thing I want to do is I want to open up a couple of these. Okay, one thing that's useful sometimes if once we start adding materials is to turn on this material override, and you can see how that immediately updated. So it's no longer using the default colors. It's just using this one material, which is here, the override color. Okay, so if I want to change that, this could all be my override color. Not that I would want to, but that's how you would do that. And it's just all it's doing is just removing all of the materials from everything, so that we can see a clean clay render and analyze the lighting um, in the environment. Okay, so we can make sure that that's on for this part, and then go back and turn it off. Okay, so that's on. Next, we'll want to make sure. Let's see. Nope, not that one. I think we'll do render output next. So so render output is more about the camera and the render quite literal output size, right? So we have a couple of options. I'm going to just stop this, and then we'll take a look at the screen in the background, because it's really taking this render from our scene in Rhino space. Okay, so this camera view in Rhino has an actual kind of frame to it, right? It's rectilinear, and what V-Ray has here is this kind of safe frame that you can turn off and on. And what that will do is kind of help you to keep your geometry within the bounds of the camera in a safe area where you're going to see these things. Okay, so we have and we can see it better, I think, if we change the aspect ratio. So your default should be widescreen, 16:9. That's the ratio, right, for the height to width. And you'll kind of get, with the safe frame on, you'll see these kind of edges flanking your image. Okay, so so with that, you know a little bit better as to where to place your geometry when you're setting up your camera view. Okay, which we'll talk about in a second. Once we get our scene set up, then we'll talk about camera views. But so just know that you can have that on as a helpful guide, and then you can also change your height to width scale, right? So if I have it locked to an aspect ratio, or for instance, I make my custom, or whatever, um, but this ratio will stay the same, but I can enlarge that image. So if I go say 1200, this second number will automatically update and hold that ratio. Okay, it's just going to scale up the image and make it more detailed. As I do that, you can take a guess. You have to be really careful as to how big you make this. So it helps to know where this image is going to be, where on your board, how it's going to be viewed. Is it going to be a virtual presentation? Is it going to be an in-person? Do you have to print this? If you have to print this, then you have to make sure it's up to like 250, 300 DPI, which means if you have an image that's 36 inches wide and you want it to take up your whole board, you have that's a lot of pixels, and that's a lot of render power that you're going to have to find, because your computer might not be able to handle it, and it might have to sit and do a 10-hour render and then crash, and you don't want to be in that position. So you have to think about how big it can be, and how big you can actually get away with. So it might help to do a couple of test renders with simple geometry and print them out on a cheap piece of paper, and just see how pixelated they get. How low can you go, and have that as your, that'll be a tool for you then, not just for this one assignment, but for every studio thing you ever do and every person you ever work for. It's good to know how big um, the image is going to be and what you can get away with so far as pixelation goes. Okay, so that's a spiral I went down, but yes, so you should be careful with these guys. So I'm going to change this to widescreen again. I think I had it 800, 800 and 450. So I'll keep that there. And then camera we'll talk about in a second then. Okay, so I think it's right where we're at the point where we can turn on our sun and figure out the sun and the sky together, right? They go together in V-Ray. So I'm going to minimize this guy, and I'm going to go to my sun tab here in my Rhino space. And make sure my V-Ray, okay, it's off, great. Okay, so if you don't see the sun tab, you should find it under your options, and then turn on your sun here with little check mark. Okay, you can just click your on, and that will bring up this this menu, right? This kind of interface that is going to um, help you orient your sun to both the latitude and the longitude of where your building is. It's also going to help you figure out where the sun is and what the sun is doing at that location at different times of day throughout the year. So this is a really helpful tool to help you as the designer figure out what lighting is where, and what you have to shade, what you don't have to shade, um, and and whatever else. It can help you to inform your design decisions. Just this tiny little helpful sun. Okay, so that's just with it on. If we look here at the date and time, okay, so this is from January to December. As we adjust this, I think we can probably turn on the V-Ray frame buffer for this so that we can actually see these updates. Okay, so we can watch these update as we go from January, where the sun is very low, right? And I'm at 9 a.m. in the morning. As we go to March, where it's a little bit higher in the sky, to June and July, where it's at its peak, and then back down to a very low sun in the winter months. Okay, so I'm going to leave it about March. We also have this slider, which will help us to change the time of day. So we can go really early morning, or we can go very late at night. Um, but we can start to use these different times of day to adjust in our render to show these different qualities of our architecture. This is how it reacts at this time of day. This is how it reacts at the other time of day, especially if you had that responsive script, right? This is what is going to be your justifier of why you would want a responsive, usually expensive, right, a responsive design on your building. Well, it's because at 10 a.m. on March, 30th or May 30th, whatever I am, okay, May 30th, from this day to, September, all of these hours are going to be extremely high heat gain and blah, 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 blah. Okay. But this is your tool to help make that argument. Okay. And let's see. The other thing you're probably going to want to do is make sure you have your location set correctly, right? Because the sun is very different from Chicago to Colombo, Sri Lanka. It's coming from a totally different orientation. So you should probably you can do a little search here and see where, if your project has like a unique location or something near. You can also go in here and select, I think. Yeah, you can select a location. So um, you should be able to also um, find the location using your latitude and longitude. So if you had a very specific, like random mountainous location, you could get as specific as that. Okay, but um, usually it it's enough to just have a rough estimate of the correct latitude and longitude, just so you have the sun coming at your building from the right direction. Okay. And then the last little bit that you can do with this, so this sun options, is to, if you're modeling your building, okay, do I have water? I do. Excuse me. So say you're modeling your building and you've modeled it, this is default. Your y-axis is going to be default north. This is going to be east, and this is going to be west, south, of course. So in this view, this is my south-facing view. Okay, this is my north-facing view. This little compass over here is actually what is telling me what is north and what is south. So um, in this world, notice my y is going in the correct y direction, but so is this arrow. If I were to flip this, if I pull this arrow down and I flip this to now pointing the opposite direction, I have just reoriented my north compass. Now I'm saying this is north and this is south, this is east and this is west. Why is this useful? Well, it's useful because if you've drawn a whole huge model, okay, and you've drawn it all in XY coordinates, and it's all off of a 0, 0 grid system, and you actually need to place that huge model in some specific orientation, right? There's like some site orientation that you've kind of maybe not, yeah, probably neglected to think about until now, but you're like, oh, darn it, I have to. It's actually oriented this way on the site. This is a quick trick. Instead of having to select your object and rotate everything, um, you don't worry about it. Just leave your stuff where it is. Instead, use this little, handy dandy north arrow button and just pull that to where you need it to go. Okay. So I'm going to leave it at a default of 90 because my building doesn't really have an orientation. I just drew it. So it's not important, but it should be good to know that that's there. The other thing you have is you have manual control. So this is what you would use if you were if you didn't have a specific site, or if your specific site you weren't happy with the lighting effects and you wanted to show the light coming at it from this specific angle or from whatever. Um, but it's kind of a nice way to gauge your lighting um, in a more freer atmosphere than just locked to a location and latitude. So you can change the azimuth, right? You can change the rotation about the object to orient the sun to the most optimal lighting condition. You can also change your altitude here, where you're changing the height of the sun, right? So you can mimic the low winter sun, and then you can pull this up for the high summer sun. Okay, so this is your kind of your cheat if you don't want to follow the latitude longitude you're getting from here. Okay. So once you have this on and you have your sun kind of set up where you want it, then we can go back to our V-Ray asset editor. Okay, we can take a look and we should be able to go to our lights tab and we should see the Rhino document sun. Okay, under there we'll see the intensity multiplier. That should be fine where it is. We don't if it's appearing to be too bright in your screen, then and I'm assuming it is if you're using V-Ray. So if you go to your settings tab and you change this exposure value, that should help you. I think the default again is something like 12, right? And so it's going to look like that. Uh, that's too much. So if I lower this, that will lower that brightness. If I keep going, it can get really dark really quick. Okay, so you kind of want to play with this exposure value and try to find whatever happy medium you have. Okay, so that's how you would change the brightness. You could also change the intensity multiplier. Okay, but I suggest first adjusting the EV and trying to keep this intensity at 1. The other thing you can do with your Rhino Sun is you can change the size multiplier. Okay, and what this does is this is going to soften the edges of your object. I'm assuming you have a default of 1 set. So if you raise that, if you increase this to a larger number, what that's going to do is it's going to soften the edges of all of your geometries. So the kind of natural bevel that everything has, right? Nothing is super pointy sharp. When the light hits it, it reflects off those. Refracts off those bevels, and it softens them as it's doing so. So that's what this is doing. The size multiplier. It's just softening those edges for you, which is another great part of V-Ray. I can't say that Enscape has that. I haven't seen that kind of. There are other sliders, but not quite like that. Then the sky here. Um, let's bring in the sky since we're getting to this point, I guess. So so in order to do this, we actually have to go back to our settings and we need to go to our environment. Okay. And the environment is going to have a default texture that's going to look something like this. Okay, it's going to be like this warpy black and white something, um, but it's going to be quite intense and not at all pleasant to look at. Instead, what we want to do is we want to find this kind of environment sky. And I think because I already have it set up, that it's not giving me the option. I can try to delete this, delete, and then you can see it update. It's now taking that environment from this image, this bitmap. So if I go to my texture, there we go. Okay, so if I select my texture slot, what I can do is I can choose from here the sky option. Okay, if I choose from here the sky, it will um, it will give this kind of nice general blue tint to my scene. Okay, all right. So it works in conjunction with the Rhino Sun. So that's why you kind of need both set up for V-Ray to work for that. And so once you're here, you can click on your textures and then go to your sky, and then you can adjust the sky with the following parameters. So I think the default is Hosek, whatever that is, Hosek. Um, the I changed it to the CIE clear, which means it's going to give me this other option. So you see how Hosek has the horizontal illumination kind of blocked out and I can't adjust it. The CIE clear allows me to adjust that. And so what that's going to do, if I turn this way up, you can see how it lets me brighten up the sky. It also lets me darken the sky. Okay, so that it gives me more control over what exactly that illumination is. Okay, the illumination level. Okay, so I'm going to leave it about there. That seems about nice. The other thing I can adjust here is the turbidity. So if I turn this way up, we can see how it gets kind of a little bit polluted. That's the best way I can think of for turbidity. It's supposed to mimic particles in the air, and so I just think of it as kind of like just adding pollution to the image. Um, so that's, there's always going to be a little bit of that particular matter, so it's okay to have some, but you're probably not going to want to render your image like um, dirty. Uh, but I guess you could if you wanted to. You could show some post-apocalyptic something. Um, And then ozone here is the other slider. This is really just kind of bringing, of course, the ozone, this kind of clear, but how do I say this? It's like this you can't touch it, but it's just this kind of like thing, this screen of kind of cloud almost that is, I think it's better to just visualize. You can kind of just see this cloud of stuff in between your object and your um, right and space itself. So I mean it is what it is, right? So it's ozone. The albedo. So for these are a little bit more working in conjunction, I think, directly in conjunction with your lighting, with your sun. Okay, so the albedo color, if you raise the albedo color, you'll get more um, reflection off of that. And if it goes darker, it will of course get less reflection. And because I have my horizon offset so low, we're actually not seeing that. There we go. Okay. So you can see how the reflection off the surface right now, it's saying the albedo color is very dark. So as it reflects off that and hits that ozone color, it's becoming darker. Okay, so if I raise this, then we'll start to get the brighter reflection off of that surface. Okay, so and then the horizon offset, that's what I just lowered. This is really bringing that horizon. You can go very high, where we have we bring the horizon further down. versus very low, where we bring the horizon up. Okay, so I like to leave it about in the middle. And the blend angle is the blend angle between the two. Okay, it's just what it says. So you can adjust these as you see fit, but these are kind of your controls for to get that sky to you know a spring day to a wintry day to wintry night to whatever time of year and time of day you're trying to use. You're going to have to work with these sliders and with your sun location to get that effect. And and what is happening is you also get the effect on your geometry, right? So your sky will appear one way, and then your geometry is going to appear another. So you need to make sure they're talking to each other. Which gets me to this. So if I go back, so once I have my sky and my camera set up, I can go back to my settings, and I can take a look at the white balance here. I think I need to up this a little bit more because you can see you actually want to balance that white. You can see how when I had it at white, which is the default, the white balance is like a pure white, you start to get this kind of orangey effect. We need to balance that white from the sun, okay? And we can do that by pulling this to a darker orange, okay? So that we get more of a white effect, okay? And this is where it kind of is helpful to have um, that little box for us, right? Hmm, there, I think that's better. Because you don't want it too orange. You also don't want it too blue, and there is a little bit of gray to that. Oh, that's almost too blue. Okay, I'll leave it. I'll let it be. It's like I'm not finding the happy medium. Okay, so so once we have those fields set up, I think we're actually in a pretty good position. Um, we have Rhino document sun. We have the sun set up. We've played with our sliders. We can probably go. We have our global illumination checked. We have the environment, the sky, and the sun both working together. Okay, so I think we can add um, our infinite plane next. Okay, so we can add an infinite plane, and you can see mine already has an infinite plane, but I'll just turn that off. Okay, so you'll want to create a new layer for it, okay, because it really is just another piece of geometry. So I'm going to call mine plane 2 and double check that. And then I'll go to these V-ray options here, and I'll take a look at this one, this kind of infinity marker on the plane symbol. Pretty good icon. If I click on that, it will quickly add a plane for me. Okay, and from this plane then, if I go to my top view, it's really not that infinite. It's just a surface. But what that does is adds for me some sort of attempt at a horizon line, right? And I can kind of start to understand where that is in my image, and then kind of start to make decisions as to how to compose that image based off of that infinite plane's horizon. Okay, so and it will work with this later once we start to add site elements, but for now, this works. If you wanted to raise or lower it, you can. It's just the same as anything else. You can um, adjust the height with the gumball and add materials. And you could even do points on and start to warp it. But again, we'll talk over that later. So, so once we've added our infinite plane, I think we probably can go about adding some gra not grass, some glass to this. So you can see I've added that geometry to my V-Ray asset editor. This and now I now have 3 infinite planes in my scene. So I'm infinite plane rich. But there's nothing I can't really, it's not editable here. It's just kind of collecting those for me. Okay, so if I go to infinite plane, we have lights. So if I go to my materials tab, okay, and I keep this open and say I click on my generic material, we can go about creating glass and adding glass to our surface, to our house. Okay, so I've already done this with this V-Ray glass here. Okay, but I'll do it again now just to kind of show you the process of creating a material in V-Ray. So you can go down to this button and choose Create Asset. You'll want to go to the Materials option, go to Generic. Okay, that generic is going to come up here as I already have a generic. It's going to say Generic 1. We'll call this Glass 3, I guess, at this point, since I'm just creating a ton of glass. And now we can go about adjusting these parameters so that we can actually see that make this look like glass. So the first thing to look at is the diffuse. Diffuse is going to be either the color or the pattern, texture, whatever, of your object. Okay, this is what we're going to really notice and see about it. So as I adjust the slider, you'll notice it goes from very light to very dark. I can also adjust the diffuse to a different color, and this is how I can go about, say, making a wall paint or really any paint, right? So I can adjust these things and then start to go from there for whatever material placement I want. So that's just basic colors. I can also click this and add a bitmap to it, and then that's how I go about creating other materials. So if I wanted to add wood or concrete or some other bitmap texture, it's just a JPEG that I can bring into V-Ray. But we'll do that later. Right now we'll just keep this at a nice glass. So I'm gonna choose, I don't know, something bluish tealy. You don't actually want it to be too blue teal like this kind of like baby blue, um, because glass itself is not really like that, right? There's like kind of a darkness to it, and maybe just the teeniest blue tint. So you don't actually want it to be too far on the spectrum. Okay, so that's probably good enough. We can go back and change it. Um, the other thing that is, of course, a big quality of glass is the opacity. So if we go down here and we click the opacity, we can start to play with that translucency and pull that back. Okay, the lower it goes, the more translucent it is. So we probably want it to be somewhere around 0.2, 0.3 maybe, probably, yeah, probably around here. And then we'll want to add some reflection, right? Because that's the other key factor. So we need to adjust the reflection color. The higher that goes, you can see the more reflection we're getting off of the material here. Glossiness can probably stay up, and these other factors should be fine. So we're just going to leave that at a higher reflection color. Refraction is another key aspect. If we turn this way up, you'll see it kind of becomes ghost-like. So you can go too high, but you can also go too low where it's too dark of glass. So maybe bring that up to somewhere in the middle so that we still see the pane, but it's not, this sort of caricature of itself. An IOR probably is yeah, if we turn this up to like 2, maybe 1.7, So that's probably better, just a little bit higher. Is usually what you want to see. Okay, all right, so that looks about good. Let's compare to my other glasses. Well, I turn that blue a lot down a lot. That one's really dark. Okay, so we'll say that that's our new glass. So to apply this material then, once we've created the material in V-Ray, we have to go back into Rhino and change our material color attribute. Okay, so I have my material at my layer. I'm going to click on this. I need to change, if it's one of these generic material parameters for Rhino, then I need to go in here. I need to change this to the V-Ray material. And it might, I don't know if it necessarily changes my list of options too much. I thought that it used to give me only my V-Ray options, so maybe that was an older version. Um, so I should be able to choose from this drop-down list and choose whichever material I was working with in um, V-Ray. One thing that's curious that has happened now a couple times, because I'm seeing that here, is it's changing my material qualities. Yeah, it changed the opacity. So now that I have to go back and readjust these things. That one's fine. Okay, so something to check. Make sure your opacity is down. Okay, so once I have that, then I can go back to my settings, and you can see my material override is still there. So I can switch that off, and then I can go to my region render and just choose a bit of the glass to render, and then click on my teapot and see that update. So it's, oh, that's right, I have a different location. I changed my camera, so I might as well render the whole thing. Okay, so that looks relatively good. Um, if we want to, we can select that region and just update our glass. So if we want to, if we're not happy with it, we have to go back, select the glass that we were working from, and then start to adjust these parameters so that we can bring this up to a level that we're happy with. Okay. Okay, that's probably fine. It looks like relatively good reflection. I mean, for not having any other lighting in the scene, I think that'll work. So I can turn this off and then allow it to update that render. Okay. So once we have our glass in our scene, and I'm really just applying glass so that we can see what that light is doing internally, as well as, to the exterior for our scene. But as far as for what is required for next week, it's really just this. It's the setting up the basic sky, the sun. I'm not expecting any materials, only glass. If you have it, and then if you don't, then it's just clay geometry. Um, Adding an infinite plane, and then this last part that we're going to talk through, adjusting the camera. Okay, so because it is 3:30, I think I'm going to stop where we are, and we'll start again at 3:40 to talk through uh, composition and camera, setting up camera views and named views and all that stuff. Okay, so we'll say 3:40, we'll get back together. Okay, um, so I'm just going to step away. I'll see you guys in 10 minutes. Okie dokie. 340. Okay, so I think this is probably enough for the V-Ray portion of the class. So we're going to work on the next part, which is setting up the views. Okay, so I forwarded this website a few weeks ago, and thank you. I think Abhishek was talking to you last week, and you reminded me of it, and it's like kind of perfect for this first intro, um, in like this first basics week. Um, and so what this is it's just talking about these kind of basic rules of composition. I think it does a nice job of breaking down these kind of what are typically complex ideas, right, of how to properly compose an image. I mean, it's like a whole art class that you can work on discovering these things. But these are kind of nice, simple rules to just think about while you're setting up these views in Rhino. Okay. So we're going to walk through this page and just take a look at what it says, and then I want you to kind of have that in the back of your head um, while we're setting up our named views for the one exterior and the one interior image that you're going to be building up over the next couple of weeks. Okay, so let's look at this first one. So this is the rule of thirds that he's talking about. So this is kind of a photographer's setting, right? You're trying to setting what kind of rule, right? So you're trying to set up your image into these three, um, imagining these two lines running across your screen, these kind of three quadrants across and three quadrants vertical. Um, and what you want to do is you think about aligning your geometry or your key moments to those lines. Okay, those imaginary lines in your head. Okay, so for instance here, what he's done is he's taken his horizon and he's aligned that to the um, bottom horizon line, right? So that this meridian is running across. Um, and what that does is it gives a nice balance to what is the ground and what is the sky, right? And then that in between, which is your building, fits very nicely in that middle third. Okay. And the same thing goes for across the image, right? So he's starting to think about where these vertical meridians land, and one is at the edge of his building, and the other one is kind of nice and square uh, at the entry, right? So we're kind of our line of sight is kind of perfectly at this nice huge X that he has in this dramatic line he's pulled down. Um, so it's a very nice example image, and then everything else is kind of the supporting information, right? So we're not focusing on, even though he's in the foreground here, our eye is drawn to the center of the image because of this box, this invisible box that we've kind of made for that object to be in. Okay, um, so that's for just a typical eye level render, right? So I'm imagining I'm standing across the street and I'm just viewing the building exterior. Um, if we were to use the same rule and we compose that as a bird's eye view, um, this is quite nice that he just uses the horizon line and the meridian together, right? He aligns them. Um, and then that means if that top part is aligned, that means the middle part is mostly just the building that we want to focus on. And then everything below that line is kind of, I mean, it's still part of the building, but our focus ends up being more around this intersection of this meridian and this bottom meridian. Okay. And this would be for an interior view, where we're starting to use the structure itself, right, and our vanishing points to align off of the same sort of grid. Okay, it's kind of cool. He has this vertical line is really, I mean, it's almost exactly where our perspective, our vanishing point is going to. It's probably right about here. So, I mean, it's not exactly on, but it's pretty darn close. and it's within this box, right? So it's kind of it's keeping that centered frame, and then just kind of has it a little bit asymmetric, uh, lends a sort of drama to the space. So okay, so that's the rule of thirds. Okay, so it's just kind of imagining that grid across your image as you're aligning these things and trying to get either your vanishing point or your horizon or something, whatever you find that is your your key geometry or your key moment. You're always hearing that, right? Your key moment in your design. So if it's the approach into the building or if it's the view from your building, maybe it's, that's where you're aligning that to one of these intersections or one of these meridians, but you try to kind of compose your image um, using those. Okay, so switch to 1 point perspective. So we already mostly model in a 1 point perspective, right? So it's not really changing our method at all. But it is kind of um, interesting to uh, have the frame, so to imagine a box about your geometry, right? And to then like kind of like what I showed you in design, I think last week or 2 weeks ago, um, where you're imagining the layout not with the actual image because there's a lot of information in the actual image or the actual design or whatever, but just for composition purposes all you need is a kind of general block of what that is, and then you can start to um, kind of shift that back and forth in the frame and adjust where that perspective point is going to be. But usually you would want to try to keep that box flat to the, the screen, right? You don't want this imagined box to have some sort of odd angle. For instance, if you tilt your camera too much, or if you tilt it, give it too much of an angle in one direction, you have to kind of be careful to try to keep it flat and directed on, right? So that can be a very strong image if you're using this technique. Um, you can, I guess, for instance, if you were going to do tower, you would have to adjust that, but it can get quite distorted really quickly. So that's kind of um, a unique approach. For most images, that direct line of sight would work. So, right, this is kind of again where you have this crosshairs and you're pointing it directly at the object. It's perfectly centered. Now we're not moving that box back and forth. We're just leaving it in the middle of the screen. Um, I don't know if I'm a super fan of these because if you're to imagine this green stuff out of the way, and we just look at that as an image, what are we learning from it? Not not too much. I feel like it's not. I feel like it's kind of a generic image, and it's just something. It's like the passing by, like, oh, there's that building. I'm just going to take a photo, versus actually engaging in the building. I don't feel engaged. And that's probably because of this extra space right around the object. There's a lot of extra, and it's just context, flat context too. There's not really much of anything that's interesting. If there was a plaza or some sort of secondary element, maybe, but these are kind of trickier. Yeah, I think it says it's hard to pull off. These are kind of trickier because it's kind of just this one shot wonder, and it it doesn't really bring you in or push you out. It doesn't really do much for engaging your viewer. So it's better to like have some sort of gesture, instead of just this is a snapshot picture, like to have some sort of framing, um, and alignment, and pick a subject of your design that you want to show us, whether it be an entry or a particular view. Um, it's up to you. Um, So here it talks more about kind of giving a lot more of the image to either the ground or the sky. So this is if you want to weight the image, and then actually I've seen these pulled off really well as a weighted image at the bottom of a huge board, and then the sky. I should use my pointer. So this is like a huge board that you can imagine, and then there's this tiny, tiny little slip of ground. There's the building, and then there's the sky, and the sky bleeds into the background. There's like a nice gentle gradient, that then on top of that, you start to see these interesting line diagrams. Sometimes they're all white, sometimes they're all black, but um, it's like the plan section elevation, like it kind of lends itself to more dynamic display than just a square image here and then the plan image and elevation, whatever. They all kind of become part of the same uh, collage. So that's an interesting approach to try out if you're interested. Um, and then I think these are really nice to start to think about maybe capturing um, some particular spaces. So like these are kind of little vignettes that you can have um, that show it can be a part of your overall render. So it could be actually something from, say, this guy, and you have this one moment here, and you use actually that render, and you just zoom in to that one location and show us that one moment that you're really excited about that you think should definitely be in the project, right? Like if we can change the whole design, but this thing has to happen. This is the key. Um, so I think these are really nice, and you create a very, yeah, it get intimate. You get a very intimate moment of a person overlooking whatever below. It's a nice way to detail your building. And then this is another way to think about these special moments, right? Is where imagine we have this huge render, right? We've done this full size rendering of almost the whole board of our pretty beautiful building, but then we can also zoom in here and have this nice focused vignette on the entry only. So these are useful in times where you want to say, we want to talk about this for some particular reason. So we could have a stack of these vignettes. So we could have an image that's just at the entry. We could have another image above that that's just of, say, a balcony, or another image above that that's, a particular detail of the facade. But it's like you can pick these key elements and use these snippets of them, of a real, of your big render, and just take a snippet of it and use those as the talking point. It saves you time because you've already rendered it. You should just be able to zoom in on that and render that image. But um, then it also gives like another dynamic, right? It gives you more edge to your argument because you've chosen these particular things for your viewer to engage with. Okay. And then these down here, these are both kind of just like things to be aware of, I guess, when you're setting up your views. So one of them is beware of the verticals. So as you're setting up your view, you'll notice that the edges of a building can start to bend in if you're in 1 point perspective, right? And I think we have that. Oh, I think I might have changed my view actually from the first class. Properties. I do have it at 2 point perspective. Okay, so if I change this to perspective, just regular old perspective, and if I change my lens length, you can see how we start to get our verticals a little off from vertical, right? So I think my buffer frame does a good job of as a comparison. So from this view, you can start to see if I have an imaginary line, this vertical is not as vertical as I thought, because here this is actually 2 point perspective, and this is a true vertical. So they kind of help. It helps to, especially for the quality of our image, it helps to keep those straight, true straight, right, true vertical, and we can change that just by changing it to 2 point perspective. Okay, and that kind of adjusts at least for our exterior views. For interior views, we may or may not work, can also lend to distortion. So if we were to zoom out and start to pan around, you can start to see how that becomes distorted, right? So it really only works at these eye level setups. Okay. if you know what 2 point and single point perspectives are, right? We have we have two vanishing points here instead of just the singular one, right? Here we have one vanishing point going off into space. So if I were to draw a line along this floor and along this roof eave, these would converge at some point in far off space. If I change this to 2 point perspective, that effect happens on both sides. So we have a vanishing point moving to this location, and then we have another parallel, or not parallel, but another convergence. There we go. On this other side, where I would be able to draw a line um, in either direction, and then they converge here also at this center line. The nice part being, of course, that true vertical that comes from it. And then also parallel. We've talked about parallel before, but because your site model was your site isometric was requested to be a parallel view. So parallel is just an isometric, right? So everything, there is no vanishing point. Everything is in parallel to itself. So you can see that here with our vertical lines and our roof lines. These are all they're all parallel. Okay, we generally are working in perspective, so we don't, we haven't had to really think about these things. Um, and I would suggest that if you're setting up your view, you're going to want to probably flip back and forth in between perspective and 2 point and kind of see which one looks the most correct. So you're going to have to make that judgment. But it's good to know that it's correctable if your lines are too if this tower is too wide or weird or whatever and it's looking distorted, you have some options. Okay, so that's for vertical correction. And then here, this is a good rule of thumb too. Don't be a giant. I love this. Yeah. Um, and so this is really, it's going back to this idea of being in the image, of engaging the viewer. Okay, so you want the person that you're showing this to imagine that they're one of the people that are going to be using your building. Um, and if the camera view, the camera height and camera angle does that, right? Because it can mimic our real life camera. So if you're going to be a person taking a picture of a building, you probably will have some angle to the camera, um, but you're going to always generally be at eye level. So if you're too high, it kind of looks either like you're on a second floor of a building looking out, which I guess is possible, but we don't. It's kind of still an awkward height because you wouldn't be at 10 feet, you'd be at like, I don't know, 10 plus 5, so you'd be at like 15 feet. So either way, it's not really a good way to engage the viewer because they're still going to feel like they're above everybody. Versus if you bring that down, if you bring the camera down and the target down to eye level, um, then you start to engage people and they start to feel like they're part of the crowd. You kind of, when you're doing this, you want to be careful that you don't have too many elements clouding your your geometry, right? So things like trees, um, these lamp posts, all these other site elements. Um, if you already have them in the site and you start to bring your camera down and they start to get in your way, in the camera view way, just turn them off. Select them, select hide. I mean, if they're not integral to the project, I should say. If it's a design element like a building, you're probably going to want to show the building. You should maybe choose a different view if the building is in your way, because in real life we will see the building too. But a thing like a tree, that that can, sorry, but that can go away over time. So what we want to see is we want to see the thing that you're designing in that space. So you want to make sure the other elements don't cloud the view to your building. And I think another thing to note for this particular image is that as he's cut off the building, so I have a complaint to Alex. Yeah, this is a very nice image, but it should be about that much higher. So we should see the fullness of the design of the building. We should not see a crop off of it. If we're going to show, especially this far away, um, we should see the entirety of the structure. We have more than enough space to do so. If anything, we can zoom out the camera and collect more of the site information if that's the ratio we need to keep. Otherwise, just change the ratio, right? Adjust the image picture height so that we grab that top part of the view. Okay, and that can be done like I just showed you in the V-Ray setting. And in Enscape, there's a similar setting, right, where it's the image output. So it's just a matter of making sure that you have what's important in mind and you keep that and don't get so keep these rules of thumb, but don't get sidetracked by them. So yes, you've done a good job of bringing us into the crowd, and now we have that eye level. But if you've cropped off the half the building, then you know we still don't get that half of the building. So just be aware. Okay. So I'll send out this site after class. I need to send out I'll probably send it with the tutorial that or this class YouTube link as well. But I think now we can just go into Rhino and set up a couple of these views. Okay, so we're going to set up um, an exterior view and we'll set up an interior view, and then we'll go back and we'll make sure that our camera settings are correct. Okay, so the ratio, size, and everything, and then we'll move on to a little bit of Enscape at the end. But like I said, I have that tutorial up, so I don't think you need me to say it twice. Enscape is pretty straightforward if you know a few magic buttons. Okay, so let's go into named views and camera setup. So under the options tab, we can make sure that these are on by just selecting this check mark for the named views. Okay, and this window should pop up. You probably don't have one there if you have not been using these. So to create one, what we can first do, and I'm going to exit out of this and get my 4 windows up for once. Okay, so what we can do is in my rear view, I guess is what I've called it, my perspective view. Let me just change this. Okay, so in my perspective view, I'm going to go up to my command and I'm going to type in camera and I can select show. Okay, and I have to do that in this view because this is whatever view I have selected is going to be what is the view to my camera. Okay, so this is what I'm looking at. And then in my other views, I start to see the camera pop up and I'm able to select these points. Okay, you can see I've selected one point here. And if I zoom in, I'm very zoomed out. Okay, so you can see my camera in my plan view. So this is my camera, and then this is my target. So I can adjust my camera this way to if I want direct control over my camera and my target. Okay. I can also adjust this view just using my my mouse, right? I can scroll back and forth, so I can kind of step back or step forward using my little wheel. I can also orbit by right clicking and orbiting about my object. You can see how as I do that in these other views, my camera is still hanging on to wherever that target is placed. So a nice thing to do is to be able to zoom in here and move this target to a particular location that I want to make sure that I'm focusing in on. Okay, so say I want this entry. I swear that's an entry. I haven't modeled the door or anything. So, but I just kind of trust me that this is my entry into the place. But say I wanted to kind of focus in on that, I could adjust my target for my exterior render to a specific point that I want to for my target to appear to look at, and then if it's too tricky to move this back and forth if I don't feel like I'm getting a good angle. Um, okay, I could also just right click and orbit, and that will hold my target. Okay, but if I pan, notice that target starts to move. Okay, so pan is a little bit it starts to break my setup. Okay, so I think my camera is still. If I go to my properties menu, so if I select into my camera view and I go to my properties tab, I can see what my camera lens length is. Okay, so I've been changing this while we've been talking, right? I went back and forth and changing it. So right now it's set at 50. If I do 30, that is the lens length width is brought out, and I'm getting more. I'm grabbing more of my view. Okay, so as this gets smaller, I'm starting to grab more of my image. Okay, so if I go to 25, if I go to 10, I start to grab more and more of the site. Um, and it works inversely, of course. So if I start to increase this number, my angle gets narrower and narrower until eventually it's just flat. Okay, and you can, and one thing to note as you're adjusting this is it will start to distort your geometry as well. So you have to be careful of your distortion. Okay, so I'd say 30 is probably the max that I would do, and then something around 60. So I usually it's usually 50 for me, 30 to 50 that I start to adjust these things. Okay, otherwise it gets a little bit warpy. Okay, so if I can pan here now, yeah, you can see how that's starting to warp if I start to rotate this. Okay, that looks a little bit more realistic. Okay. All right. So then if I want to show, say, an approach to my house with a little bit of background, right? I can pull my horizon line now that I have my infinite plane set up. I can pull my horizon line so that it's somewhere around the third rule, right? And I have a little bit of foreground to play with, so I can show some entry path. But the height seems a little bit off. So if I go to my Z location for my camera, I can give that an exact height. Okay, so I can say I want my camera height to be at 5.5, and then I think my Z, my target, um, also needs to be brought down. There we go. And then you can see these update here. I think maybe a target's a little bit higher. So we want, because usually when you take a picture, you always tend to tilt the camera a little bit. So it's okay if it's a little bit higher. But the camera should definitely be something like 5 or 6 maybe. Yeah, 6. Okay. But notice if I start to pan, I start to break those things. So, it's about finding what feels good and what feels right, and then making sure that these are somewhere close to right. Kind of like this. I think I'll keep that horizon line, and then it kind of is right at the half point of my house, and I feel like I can walk up into it. Okay, so I'm going to go to my named view now. I notice I have another project in here, so I'm just going to create a new view. So I'll save as, and then I'll go to, I'll have to rename this, and we'll say, I need a new naming system. A1, how about that? And then we'll say entry. Okay. All right, so if I start to click on these other views, I can go back and select this, and that way I can start to build these renders week by week just by saving that view and then re-rendering view with my V-Ray. Okay, so I can click my interactive. The V-Ray frame buffer will update, and I will get my new image here. Okay. 14.35, not 12. There we go. Okay, so that's setting up an exterior view. Oh, that's setting up an exterior view. Okay. And I'm going to think about, so for me, I was thinking about I want to focus on the entry. I have my horizon at kind of the third rule. This is kind of crossing the third rule meridian on the left side, right, for my entry. And then I kind of have this site context space that I can start to fill out um, in the following weeks with things like trees and grass and some sort of scene background. Okay. So that's what I'm thinking about for that one. For the interior view, I can now that I have this saved, I can break my where my camera is. That doesn't matter anymore, and I can start to move this and adjust my camera so it's inside. Okay. I'm going to adjust this height so that it's also 5. Okay. And here we're going to probably want to make sure our lens length is a little bit lower. Okay, so this is where it helps us to see more of the space, right, to expand that. Even try 25 if we want, but you can see how once you start to get this to be too wide, too small, then you start to get this warping and this distortion of your space. And the whole point of an interior render is to um, give us an idea of what it's like to be in that space. So, if you get this to be too distorted, it gives us an incorrect impression. So we don't want to go too far. Um, we want to grab as much space as possible, but at the limit of distortion. How about that? So if I select this camera, we start to bring that back, go about as far as possible um, before things start to get funny. Okay, we'll go back in our corner. Now I'm going to select my camera view and just kind of swing that around. Okay, so I can try to pull in this wall, though because I'm in the corner, I don't know if that's going to work too well. But I do want to see my entry. Okay. I want to see my entry and I want to kind of understand how that it feels to see somebody enter that space. So I'm going to kind of swing this around a little bit so I can see that wall as well as this wall. Okay. And I think I also kind of have to be aware that as I start to set these things up, okay, I can adjust this height. There we go. I want my camera to be at 5 and my target to be at 6. There we go. Okay, so as I start to set these things up, I can think about what I'm going to see in this image, what I'm going to show. Um, right now, I'm kind of not, I'm showing the entry, but that's about all. So, I might want to take some time to, I also don't have to be so particular, right? I can start to move my camera around and try to adjust this freehand with my mouse to try to get the best image for my interior, right? They tend to look a little bit better if you have a little bit of an angle to these things, right? So there we go. So a little bit off center, right? A little angle to the room. And then that way I know that I'm going to be seeing the entry and I'm going to be seeing out this window. So it's kind of key that I'm going to have some view uh, out out this window and out this front. Okay, so I need some sight for that. Okay. Um, I also need to have some program for this interior space figured out for my next part of the render. So I need to know what the space is going to be, whether or not there are going to be any morph boxed, bars in there, or that kind of thing, right? I need to kind of start to think about how I'm going to plan out this interior and what furniture I need to see to help me understand how that space is used. So I think um, that'll come in the following weeks, but right now it is still in kind of a part of the render setup. Not that you can't adjust this, of course. We can adjust the camera and everything once we get to that point of adding geometry and materials. Um, but for now, just a simple interior render setup like this, where you're starting to think about where your target height is, where your camera height is, what views we're going to be seeing, what other information do you need to be aware of, and then of course the general composition, where those meridian lines are, or how you're generally composing your image. Um, so mm, And if you do a straight on, just be aware that you're going to want to try to make sure that your lines are straight. So this might be a good opportunity to do the 2-point perspective, just to, if you're going to do a centered image, just to make sure that these things are actually parallel. Okay. And then once you have that set up, you can just go to your named view and create your new interior view that you're going to work on over the next 3 weeks. Okay. All right. I think that's about all for camera setup. I think the next little part then is to do a quick walkthrough of Enscape, and then we will call it a week. Uh, and of course, the sun is just going down here, so if you were planning on getting outside, I'm sorry. But I was hoping to do a walk. But okay. All right, so we have 20 minutes left, so let's make sure that we understand a little bit of Enscape. Okay, so I'm going to turn off my V-Ray. I'm going to turn off my V-Ray asset editor. Okay, and I'm just going to generally keep things. Turn off my save frame, which was and output save frame. Okay. All right, so I'm going to turn off my camera. H hide. Bring back my view. And now we'll test out some Enscape. Okay, so if you've downloaded Enscape and you're not viewing that in your menu here, you should see these bars, right? I had V-Ray here, but then this is my Enscape interactive bar, and then this is my Enscape capturing bar. If you don't see these, you should be able to right-click on your toolbar up here and go to Show Toolbar. And then if you go down to the very bottom, you'll see the Enscape Rhino 6 plugin, and you can select your Enscape and then Enscape capturing. For some reason, I have a bunch of Enscape capturings, and I'm not entirely sure why I have 2 here and I have a few up here, but I do. So I just make sure I have one of these Enscapes, which is going to be this bar, and then I have one of my Enscape capturings available to me, which is this bar. Okay, for V-Ray, you can, if you didn't see this bar, it should automatically show up. Enscape's a little different. You have to manually add them like this, but V-Ray it should just automatically load into your Rhino interface. If it doesn't, you'll have to do the same thing where you go to Show Toolbar, but you can go down to the bottom here and select V-Ray Compact. And then you'll get this image or this interface, okay? Probably should have gone over that first. Huh? Sorry. Okay, so once you have this, the quickest and easiest way to start Enscape is to click the play button. So Enscape's start, and what it will do is it's like this separate window that's going to pop up, and instead of like a V-Ray space, we can already see the difference here. Um, we have some edges to our geometry. We have some intent for sky. It's taking our infinite ground plane that we have in there, and it has it has just a very cleaner, crisper quality. However, it's also less photoreal. So it's just kind of, it's quick and it works. It's a great way to make these, design decisions, whether or not the material's working or geometry is working, whatever. Just click Enscape and take a look. But if you're doing full, you can do very nice renders with Enscape. You just have to kind of make sure you turn up your quality and get your lighting just right and materials mapped correctly. Um, so anyway, so just to navigate Enscape, there are these simple controls at the bottom, right? You'll have this little bar. So if you toggle, if you just type H, that can disappear. If you type H, it'll come back, okay? And the same thing will go for um, these interfaces up here, okay? So first, let's go through this bar. Okay, so we have A, S, W, D. All of these are your little movers, okay, to get through the space. So A is going to shift the camera to the left, but you're going to, of course, move the geometry to the right. D will do the inverse. W will move your camera forward. S will move your camera back. E will move your camera up, and Q down. To make these moves faster, so if it's taking forever, you can hold shift and then select whatever movement you want to, to do. Then you can also use your control if you want to go super fast. So you can zip around. Okay, this is if you really have like a huge model and you, there we go. If you have a huge model and you want to zip around the whole thing and you're, working between multiple views. Another way to navigate your model is to simply click on it. So you can double click and it will zoom the camera in as far as possible to the geometry that you selected. You can also right click to orbit. Okay, so you're going to want to right click your geometry. If you right click the ground, oh, I do have a plane there, so it's going to work. But if I click the sky where there's no geometry, it will not work. Okay, so I need to click some hard geometry from my Rhino space in order for my orbit to know what I want to orbit about. To pan, I can just hold my little central wheel on my mouse and pan to left to right. And rotate is you can see here, my left click button. Okay, so that's just going to rotate my camera alone. Whereas my right click is going to orbit about the geometry itself. Okay. One cool thing about Enscape that I like so much more than V-Ray is that you have an awesome control of time of day. Okay, so if I just kind of give this a look, see? Okay, orient that there. Okay, so if I hold Shift and my right click my mouse and shift my mouse over, I can change the time of day. As you can see, that's updating in the bottom corner of my screen. So it's now 1 o'clock, sorry, 3 o'clock, me time, 1 o'clock, noon, now we're going to the morning. We're literally turning time backwards. We're so powerful. Super fun. We can get our long shadows. We can start to see how that sun is affecting our building throughout the year. And it's all in pretty quick real time. I mean, you can do it with V-Ray, but it's just not as it's not as quick. This is really amazing that they've added this. They have this capability, so I can see what that looks like from morning throughout the day in very quick in a very quick study to just check out what exactly how my shading is working, how my responsive design is working, right? So, and I can get some pretty neat color effects. Okay. And Enscape also will take your Rhino Sun, so the Rhino Sun that we set up here. So if we have it at June right now, right, we're getting these super long shadows, right, and the super long day. So if I drag this and I bring this to say like 6 o'clock, um, I'm at what location? I gave Chicago. Okay, so right, so at 6 o'clock in June, yeah, this is about right where we have like a really long day. It goes till very late. I can turn on daylight savings, and then that should also extend my day even further. But if I update this, then if I change the time of year and I say, nope, it's now December, and it's 4 o'clock or something, um, I can then adjust that time. Okay, so it says here, yeah, I have daylight saving times checked, so it's actually 3, it says. And then I start to bring this down. Actually, what's the date today? It's November 2020. Wow, 2000. That's not, it's very old. Okay, so 11/3, is that right? Yeah, okay, cool. All right, 11/3, and let's play with this. Let's see. Okay, and it says it's going to set probably around 5, 6 o'clock. Yeah, that looks about right. Okay, I remember this was my southern exposure, right? So we can watch as that shadow moves throughout the day, and we can start to make informed decisions about whether or not maybe we don't want a full glazing facade on this side. Maybe we want to reorient this. So let's try and flip that around and see what that does. Okay, and now you can see that it's taken my position from the Rhino settings, and it's flipped my north and south locations. So now as I adjust my time, this is now my southern exposure, and this is my northern exposure. I don't know about you guys, but I could do this all day. I really love, like, I already liked sun studies, but this is like, it just makes them so much easier. You can very quickly see what works and what doesn't work. Oh, look at that. I have glazing on both sides. So either way, my design fails. Okay, so that's how you adjust your sun in Enscape. It's pretty quick, pretty easy in comparison to V-Ray, only because V-Ray you're having to wait for it to render, right? It has the interactive capability, but it kind of takes a little bit longer. That's just because the information it's trying to compute is that much more detailed. It's definitely more nuanced than Enscape. Enscape is the basics. Okay, so another cool thing about Enscape is so these are that was how to interact with it. Now we're kind of going to the view, um, how to work with the view in Rhino and work with the view in Enscape. So here, this next button after your start command is going to be your enable and disable live updates in Enscape. So if I select this, okay, it's going to say live updates false. So that means that if I make this update, right, I put my sun, if I go into my layers and I turn off I don't know, I turn off my plane, um, I go into Enscape, none of that information is changed. That's because my live updates here is turned off. If I click this again, that will now relate whatever information is in my Rhino model to my Enscape model, and lo and behold, now my north and south are flipped, and I don't have a ground plane. Okay, so if I move this over here, it's probably even better to see for you. Hey, okay. So if I update here, now it says live updates enabled. No, there we go. Live updates false, live updates true. Now I can turn on my plane again, and I can flip my sun to the 90 degrees, and now it's working, right? Versus if I click this and now my plane is not going to be, it's turning off and on in my Rhino, but not in my Enscape. So that's one thing you want to be aware of. Another thing is you can click this next button, which says Enable Disable View Synchronization. And that's between your Rhino space and your Enscape space. So as I zoom around my model here and orbit and command and choose these different views I've set up, Enscape will try to mimic that. This is the copycat button. Okay, so if I unclick this, it now says synchronize views false, and I can orbit about however I want to in my Rhino space, and Enscape is its own thing. This next button is going to be the View Manager. So this is the exact same menu of these views, these named views you set up in this one drop-down menu for Enscape interaction only. Okay, so we're going to click that, and it should pull up this all of these views as a list items. So I can click on these, and that will update my view to whatever I had set up. Okay. But if I go about and I start working on other things, that little interface box is going to disappear. So I have to go back and select that if I want to change the view. So just so you know. And then this final little button is the creates a named view. So this is if you wanted to go about an Enscape instead of Rhino or V-Ray or whatever. If you want to go in here and set up your view with just the Enscape camera, and you find a really particular view that you like, you know, really nice one, and then you go over here and you select create named view. You can name it whatever you want. I'm going to select OK and just call it Enscape named view. But now I have that same view in my Rhino space, right? So it's kind of nice. I can flip back and forth, setting up views in Rhino or setting up views in Enscape, either one. This is the VR interface. This is an asset library, which we'll talk about later, materials, general settings, and then this is going to be the visual settings window. This is key for all of you Enscape folks. This is where you're going to start setting up, and you can see Enscape open visual settings command. This is where it crashed before, so yeah, don't hold your breath. Oh, hey, it works. Okay, all you have to do is speak ill of it, and then it gets cranky. Okay, so if I pull this down, this first option that says renderings, style, outlines, if I pull this way down, we'll get absolutely no edges to our object, right? It's more like that clay rendering that we have in V-Ray, okay? It's still maybe not quite as soft, but it's pretty darn good, okay? So why would you want one with outlines versus one without it? So this is kind of like a SketchUp feel, right? Um, and this kind of goes back to what I said at the beginning, which was the level of design. So the design that you are working on right now. So if it's in the schematic design stage and you're just figuring out kind of the general geometry and the scheme of it, and you just want to focus on form, and you don't want any, like you should probably wait to apply materials if you're just focusing on form, right? So it's just purely schematic. This kind of lends itself to that same idea, right? Where it's like, this is a kind of a sketch. Let's not think of this as like set in stone. These things can change, but this is what I'm thinking. So if we do this, this looks like that. If we do this, it looks like this. So that's more or less why you would change these and up them to, I would never up them to quite as sketchy, but somewhere around the 50% to 30% range for this early stage stuff. And then as you work towards progressively towards more and more detail and outfitting your project, you'll pull these outlines back and you'll start to add more and more materials to your building so that we can actually see them, right? So, okay. Another cool thing here in Enscape is that you have this mode tab. So you're actually not gonna be able to tell too much because everything's already white. But what it does is it strips. It's the same thing as the material uh, override in V-Ray, right? Where you're just kind of saying, nope, no materials. I just want this to be all white. It does keep the glazing, which is interesting, and kind of nice. But you know, stop disappearing. But it is, I guess, it's not necessary for us right now since we don't have materials. Another cool aspect is this light view. So if we turn this on, we can do further lighting studies and try to understand what is where where sun is hitting your facade the most. This kind of gives you, this is a lux uh, calculator, right? It's kind of telling you where the most sunlight is hitting uh, your building. The thing is it's not just sunlight, but it's any light. So once we start to add light into the space, you would have to turn off those interior lights in order to see the sunlight's effects. Okay, but it does kind of help. Like if you change the time of day, you can start to see how that, how like an overhang might help, or how like louvers, vertical louvers, or some shading device, right? You can start to add these elements to your architecture, and then that kind of gives them a justification on based on what you're shading and where. Okay. And then these other few, you have your camera. You can usually leave auto exposure. However, there are some times where you might have to change this, and that's just changing the exposure of your image itself, right? You can see it gets super bright. You can also pull this down for super dark. So it's just another way of controlling your image brightness. Projection, this is back to the 2-point orthographic, and perspective is the same three, right? This is just parallel. This is 2-point perspective, and this is perspective. Depth of field, we probably don't have to change this too much. This is going to blur, right, everything about your image and focus on a particular point. It's more of a camera strategy. For photography. We don't need to mess with that. I kind of try to keep uh, like especially for most of these renders, they don't want camera tricks. They don't want too much for vignettes or too much for color um, changes. They want to see what the object is, like what the building is, and how it's really going to look. So anything that distorts that we should stay away from. Okay, so field of view is also key. This is going to be similar to if we go to our properties, if we go back to that lens length, this field of view does the same thing as this lens length. It's just the numbers are inverted. So this is actually telling you the angle of your lens. So if I zoom out, it's getting a wider and wider angle and pulling in more and more um, uh, sight. Whereas if I zoom in, I can, I'm making this angle smaller and smaller. Okay, so, okay. And then the rendering quality is this is going to by default be set to high. You can set to ultra. What that will do is that will, as you can see, it just did an update. It will try to make it even a finer, more detailed render. As you do that, it's going to use more of your computer power. So it might be slower, or it might, yeah, just crash. I've had that happen too. Medium, of course, will go down very low, and then draft, you can see how it's very sketchy. So this is usually one that you can keep it at high, but you probably wouldn't want to work at ultra. You can flip back and forth, but you don't want to work at that level. Um, then image, atmosphere, capture. Each of these have different settings, of course, for the image. I would say for the atmosphere, you're probably okay as it is. Um, you can adjust the saturation of the image here, the color temperature, right, between cool to warm. Ambient brightness is going to be the general brightness of your scene, um, which is ambient, right? It's reflecting off of your surfaces based on the shading between them. Shadows and highlights are pretty self-explanatory. Lowering your shadows will reduce their intensity. Highlights, if you bring this up, it will increase the intensity or lower them, right? That's what I love about Enscape. It's very intuitive, right? All of the names, everything is kind of labeled pretty clearly for us to understand. Um, this page, I think you should probably, this should be the focus of what you're playing with. So you're trying to understand um, what the sighting is. So kind of where your building is, right? And the sun location. So you're going to understand the sun brightness. Okay, what your sky looks like, what time of day it is. Are you going to change the time of day? Is this going to be a night render? Are we going to need to add lights to this? Is this going to be a dusk render? And do we need to adjust this night sky brightness? What do these things do? You know, shadow sharpness, moon size. Pretty cool that you can adjust the moon size. Okay, I don't even see a moon. Um, okay, artificial brightness. We'll talk about this next week when we start adding lights to the scene. Okay, so we're going to add lights in here, and this will be the one controller we can use. Um, and then we also have the ability to just turn off our sky, right? We can change that. Um, and then clouds. Clouds is another fun slider area where you can change the density of what's in your sky, right? Variety, what type there are, cirrus amount. You can see them. They're the ones way up in the stratosphere. You can pull up. I don't actually know what contrast those. We can change the X and Y locations of these, right? You can shift them back and forth. So you can get your sky set up, your environment, the camera view, the lighting, try to pick your time of year, scene, all that stuff. That's what I'm looking for. Okay. So, and then this is going to be your output page. So you want to make sure that your resolution is set to ultra. I think the default is full HD. So you want to make sure that this is set to ultra usually when you're exporting from, it doesn't take much longer. It's not like V-Ray where there's going to be hyper detail that you have to wait for. This should be relatively quick. And you can also change custom if you want an even larger or smaller or different aspect ratio. You can show save frame, doesn't really do much. And then the other thing I have is I have the export, well, I have the export type. So I set that to PNG or JPEG, right? So um, I think I actually didn't look at that. I want to say outputs. I think the PNG does the same thing here. Yeah, it takes away the sun, or it takes away your background. So if you wanted to do a JPEG, or with a full background, you'd have to save it as a JPEG. Um, but don't quote me on that. I'm now confusing V-Ray and Enscape after a full day of it. Um, and then the other thing that you can do, like you just saw in my folder, and then I'll stop, I promise, is you can export, you can select this button and get these other exports along with your regular image. Okay, and what these other exports are is I have the image that I exported, and then I have the depth, I have the material ID and the object ID. Um, so the depth is going to show me the ground, and it's going to show me, like it's going to give me a nice block, right, to use in Photoshop. I can then select this and uh, cancel out any of my other background geometry and then just add in my own scene. That's why that's really useful. It's just to select it very quickly in Photoshop. For material or object ID, either one of these will work. For the way I've set it up, it doesn't really matter for mine. But what it will do is it will give you these kind of similar things where you can quickly select these colors in Photoshop and create masks to then place materials or any other effects on particular parts of your model. Okay, so that's what that export object material and depth channel will do. Okay, so that was 15 minutes of Enscape in like an hour of V-Ray. So it kind of tells you about what is what. Um, they're both great, but you just the learning curve in comparison to the other is like night and day. Um, I hope you're learning from both that I'm talking about. So okay, I am going to stop talking and start to sign off here. Remember the class, this is in the class folder, right, for your assignment for next week. You just need to get your exterior and your interior renders set up. Okay, I'm not expecting this next week. I'm expecting that super basic clay render. Get your scenes figured out. What time of day, what time of year, what are you going to even render? What are you going to focus on for this? Um, Try to, if you are doing stuff for our class and you want to make sure that you're saving time, I would say, we're going to be asking for these renders as a part of your boards. So whether it's these renders or something else, but it's going to have to pertain to whatever design you show us on your board, right, for your final board. So I would think you'd want to use the next 3 weeks to build up, um, these two renders so that you can put them on your final board and not have to worry about them. They're just done. Um, that just lends itself to figuring out what what you want to do uh, right now. So, anyways, all right, I'm gonna go. I've been talking all day, so I have a hoarse throat. So thank you guys for your time. I hope that that was somewhat helpful to kind of give an overview of both V-Ray and Enscape. Next week we'll have some more fun with lighting, okay, and scene elements. So let me know if you have questions. Otherwise, I will see you next week.